right, I'm going to get started. What we're going to do, I'm going to have to amend this a little bit. We are going to go over the path of light stuff. The bootstrap stuff I wanted to go over with you just so you know. If you haven't experienced this already today, we're having some internet problems. All right, I'm not able to unzip a bunch of stuff. I'm not able to do a bunch of stuff that I had out there for you. For example, when I tried to get to this morning, I tried to go out to this is your homework assignment. And when I tried to go out to here, and I don't know, Tiffany, if I gave you one of those or not, I'll have to give you one. But if I clicked on it, it timed out waiting to try to open it. But if I grabbed it, just grabbed the URL and highlighted all of it, when I first tried to put it into Chrome, it timed out again. When I tried to put it into Firefox, then it opened. Then I closed it and tried to open it again in Firefox, and it timed out in Firefox. Now, I wasn't totally aware of this, but Charles and I were talking about this morning. I don't know if you know this or not. Technically, we don't have internet on this campus. We get it from St. Louis. So it gets, and no one knows why it's like that. But evidently that was a decision that was made by IT a while ago, the IT department here. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't really matter. What they're talking about doing is once they build another building over there, and they probably IT will be housed over there, then they want it set up so we have our own internet connection. But until then, we're going to have to work with it, where if we have problems like this, we just have to work through them. All right? So what I want to do then is start to go over the Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 stuff for Path of Light. And I did send this to everybody this morning. And where is it? So the idea is, at least with Chapter 7, once you get done, you can see how we've changed this stuff. All right, still pretty much looks the same, but we've added the responsiveness to it. So notice when you start cutting it down, you can see how the pictures go away. All right, and typically this is actually smaller than you'd have anything. For a tablet size, it'd be more like that. So again, you can see how this is now set up and how we've gone and we have removed the pictures, among other things. All right, so that's what we're supposed to be adding today. I do want to mention to you also, just so you see this, that the next chapter that we actually go through, we went over Chapter 7 and 8 yesterday, but the next chapter that we actually go through in here is going to be Chapter 9. And once we do go through Chapter 9, then what you're going to see is we will now have that contact form. Chapter 9 is on forms. All right? So really the whole site will more or less be done. Now that's an unbelievably simplistic form that they've created, but that's not really what's important. All right? So like I said, what I want to do between now and hopefully around 9 o'clock is go over pages 366, 367, 368, and 369. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go over the Path of Light thing for Chapter 8, because what that one does is it changes this schedule that currently is in there as an unread list, it changes it to a table. All right, that's all that it does. Again, you will not be tested at all on tables. All right, but my hope is if we work on this until around 9 o'clock or so, then after that, you'll have 2.5 hours to sit there and work on stuff. And then from 11:30 until 12, we'll go over the review. All right, so that's the plan for the rest of the day. If I can get this other stuff to work, I want to, at least I'll put it out there for you. It's some bootstrap stuff. The other thing, and I didn't send this to you yet, but I will, is I think I've shown you this site already. And it's webcodegeeks.com. Well, if you go out to webcodegeeks.com and you click the CSS tab, underneath it is Bootstrap. And there are about a dozen different tutorials that are underneath there, about 6 on this page and about 6 on the next page. All right? And I don't know why it's giving me this stuff, but it is. There, no thanks. I went up to the first one last night and grabbed this. This is Bootstrap Tutorial, the Ultimate Guide. And it's actually very well written, but what I did was I took it, cleaned it up, and saved it as a PDF. Now the thing is, it's about 75 pages long. Okay, so I'm not going to say that, oh yeah, you should be able to read that in a night. No, it's not easy stuff. But what they do is they go over about 30 basic Bootstrap concepts in there, and once they go over it, they give you code. They go over another one, they give you code. They go over another one, they give you code. And they keep doing that, and when they give you code like that, they show you, after they put the code in there, what it's supposed to look like. So I thought this was very well done. What I have done, just in case I didn't tell you before, I think I did, but in case I didn't, is what I have done is with the other ones that are in there, the other stuff that's under webcodegeeks.com, I went out there last summer, that's before they put this thing in here, which was the tutorial or the overview. I went through the other 11 tutorials and made videos on them. So those are out there. So if that helps you at all, great. It's out on the YouTube channel. I'm not going to go through that right now. So like I said, what I want to do is I want to jump in and start going over the Path of Light stuff for Chapter 7. So the first thing that you're asked to do in here is to grab the last one that we had worked on, which was the Path of Light for Chapter 6, grab the folder, copy it, paste it in, and call this one now, instead of Chapter 6, call it Chapter 7. So again, that's the first thing I'm going to do. So right now, my Chapter 6 and my Chapter 7 look identical to one another. All right, why is that important? Well, again, if you look up on the screen here, we have not put in the responsiveness stuff. So notice that when I start to collapse this down, what happens? Basically nothing. I think you'd agree with that. All right, so this is totally non-responsive. All right. So they go through here and they tell you on page 366, there's basically 7 tasks that we have to perform here. Create the new folder. I've already done that. Modify the home page to include a viewport meta tag and an updated header area. We'll do that in a second. Modify the classes page to be consistent with the home page. Modify the schedule page to be consistent with the home page. All right, so 1 through 4, ideally at least, are not going to take very long because it's adding a line or two of code in there. Then we get up to step 5. Modify the desktop styles in yoga.css. That's where we will start. We will start to bring in the responsiveness. Step 6, modify yoga.css and code a media query for tablet display. And in number 7, modify yoga CSS to create a media query for smartphone device display. Now, a couple things about this. Yes, you will be asked about what is basically on the test tomorrow, the equivalent of what is responsive website design. All right? And what is mobile, mobile one or whatever they call it. We'll go over all that stuff later, but the idea is that your site is supposed to scale up or down regardless, depending on the type of media you're looking at it with. So if I look at Path of Light on my phone, it's supposed to still be viewable. In other words, it's going to look more like it does at the end of the Chapter 7 exercise. All right? All right. So again, the first thing that they want us to do, and I want to talk about this as we're doing it, is they want us to come in here and they want us to open up the index.html page, which I'm going to open up. All right. And they say configure a viewport tag that configures the width, okay, of the device width and sets the initial scale equal to 0. All right. And I want to make sure I'm giving you the right syntax, so I'm literally just going to grab it from the completed copy. And that'll give us a chance to sit and talk about what's in there. So that meta tag, which you see right here, and you're going to see it in just a second, you typically add this. It doesn't matter if it goes above or if it goes below, but it's the line that's right here. I'd like to keep the meta tags together. So I'd like you to open up your index file and put in that line that you see there in gray. And once you put it in, we'll stop and talk about it in just a second. Now, just so you know, viewport was actually something that was created by Apple. All right? And it pretty much, from its inception, was created to be something that would work with different types of devices. All right? But Apple wanted something that would work with an iPhone or an iPad or an iPad mini or a MacBook Pro or a whatever. All right? And it's been kind of gleaned, which is a polite way of saying stolen, by virtually every other, all right, manufacturer. So the meta, that where it says name equal viewport, when you put this in, what you're saying is you're starting to allow for responsive website design. All right? And what this says in English, when you say width equal device width, you're saying be selfish. I want this web page to grab as much of the width of the device as it can possibly grab. You know this as well as I do, probably many of you better than I do, that whether I have, when I look at something on my phone in portrait mode, or if I look at it in landscape mode, it might look markedly different. All right, but what we're saying is regardless of what we're using and regardless of the orientation in which we're using it, have it take up as much of the screen as possible. The reason that that's important is by default, what most browsers do is they put some margin and padding on the ends, left and right, and on the top and bottom. What we're saying is we don't want that. All right? And this is not a math class, but I've got a question for you. If I said to you right now, if I said, I'll make this nice and big so you can see it. All right, if I said to most of you or any of you in here, what is that? You'd all be able to tell me. It's 5/10, it's 1/2, it's whatever. What you may or may not tell me, if I said what is that, it's also 50%. Okay? And the reason that I'm telling you that is when you say initial scale equals 1.0, what you're saying is when it opens up, have it open up full size. 1.0 means 100%. All right? So does everybody understand? What we're saying in here is we want this to look right and scale correctly regardless of what we use to open up the page. Does that make sense? All right. Now that's the only change I've made. So let's see, because I don't know. So let's see. By doing that, my guess is it's not going to change very much in here, but it might. So we're on the home page here. All right. So you can see nothing has really happened yet because we have to use this in conjunction with our CSS to tell it based on the screen size that we're using, what do you want to do? I went back this morning and I rewatched that first video that you have as part of your assignment. It's actually really, really well done. And there's not a lot of code in it, but you have to put the code in there. You have to go in and basically replicate the code. And I noticed when I brought it up, because it didn't show the last time I watched it, it said click here to download the code. And I thought, well, okay, I guess the students will be able to do that. You clicked, but he wants you to join his channel, and then it's $3 a month if you want the code. So I suppose that you could do that if you really wanted to, but there's not much code that you're going to have to add in here. All right, so that's task 2, step 1. Then on number 2 here says the home page displays a phone number in the contact information area. Wouldn't it be handy if they could click on it? It says configure a hyperlink to an ID named mobile that contains the phone number as shown below. All right. So I'm going to come down here, and down at the bottom, there's our phone number right there, way down near the bottom of index.html. All right. And they want us to change this so that it looks like this. All right, so they want that line to look like this. Hopefully you can read that all right. You can hit enter a couple more times here and put that up a little higher. All right, so you want this line where previously all it said was what you see in black there. All it said was 888-555-5555. And go ahead and save. All right, now the author says that when we run this, okay, and I didn't think it was going to happen, but it did, and it didn't. But they say, the author says here, wait a minute, a telephone link could confuse those visiting the site with a desktop browser. Code another phone number directly after the hyperlink. All right. Code a span assigned to an ID named desktop around the phone number as shown. I found that confusing, but I think what the author is saying is do this. So I'm going to put this on another line here, just so that it all shows okay. So the two lines, or the one line that we had that originally just said 888-555-5555 now looks like this. It would have been totally fine to put that on one line. I broke it up into two lines so you could read it. Otherwise, it would have scrolled off the screen. All right, but if you are more comfortable putting that into one, just into one line, then by all means do that. All right, now the next thing that we're supposed to do is we're supposed to grab that meta tag that we just put in there. So go ahead and copy that to the clipboard if you would. And then we're supposed to open up our classes file. All right. Again, I'm on step 3 here. Open the classes file, add the viewport tag in a manner consistent with the home page. So I opened up classes and I keyed that, or I put in that one also. So I just added the viewport tag also there to my classes file. Then it says remove the height and the width attributes from the image tag. Okay, so I'm going to go down, find the image tag, and remove the height and remove the width. Now, here's a question for you. Why do you think you might want to remove the height, you might want to remove the width? Does anybody have any idea? Pardon? Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but the idea is as our page grows and shrinks, all right, we may want that. You saw when it got real small how we wanted that to disappear. If we leave it the way it is, it's not going to disappear. All right, so in order to be able to use this with responsive web design, we're removing that. And what we may end up doing is setting the image size to 100% in our CSS. All right, so again, what I did in the classes file was I added the viewport tag right there. All right, then I went down to where we had the image for our yoga mat, and I removed the height and I removed the width. I'm going to save that. All right. And again, as of right now, doesn't really look any different. All right, but we've done the first 3 steps. Step 4 then. Now it says open the schedule file. And again, in the schedule file, underneath that first meta tag, we're supposed to add this back again. All right? And we are again supposed to remove the height and the width from the image tag. So I just put in the meta tag in my schedule.html file. Now I'm going down to where I've got my image, and I'm again removing the width, and I'm removing the height. All right? So if I'm correct here, we've got everything done on 366, and on 367, we have now completed the first 4 tasks. All right? Any questions on any of that stuff? All right. Step 5 says modify the desktop CSS. So it says open the yoga.css file, which we're going to open right now. All right, and there it is. It says remember the telephone number hyperlink you created. Configure the CSS for the phone number display as shown below. I'm going to jump down way to the bottom here. In fact, I'm going to hit enter a bunch of times to push that up. So I'm going way down to the bottom, and I'm going to put in exactly what they showed in the book here on step 5, except I like to put mine on several lines here so it's easier to read. Okay, I've got a question for you, and here's a little free bonus for you. This is on the test tomorrow. This is on the test. The stuff we put in there in gray, what does that mean? Everything combined into 1 or 2 sentences. What does this mean? What does the first part mean? What does line 58 mean? This line. Somebody's got to know this. What does that line there mean? What does the pound sign mean? It's if the ID is set to mobile, it's saying don't display this. Display none means make something invisible, for lack of better words. So if you don't want something to show on a web page, all right? Now think about why you might want to do this. This is an example. All right, and maybe not a great example, but it's one that I've seen before. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. To me, if I've got a form that I put on a page, I know we haven't talked about forms yet, but if I've got a form that I'm going to put on a page that's going to ask a person their first name, last name, and email address, let's just say to register for something, all right? If I put that on a page, I'm going to have a button underneath it that might say register or submit or whatever, okay? What a lot of sites will do is they'll take that button and they will gray it out, which means that it'll be disabled until you put in a name, first name, a last name, and an email address. Does that make sense? But what some sites will do is they won't even show that button. They'll make it invisible until you put in a first name, until you put in a last name, and until you put in a valid email address. Then it'll display it. So if you want to do something like that, where you want something to not show, you use display : none. If you remember, we talked about this in an earlier chapter. We looked at it again here. There's display block. There's display inline. There's display inline block. And there's a display none. Those are the 4 big ones. Display block means if I've got 2 different things here, here's a thing and here's a thing. Block means display one and then put a blank space and display the other one. That makes sense? That's display block. Display inline means if at all possible, display them on the same line. All right? Display inline block means do this, but you can work with the height, you can work with the width, that depending on the size, it might look like this, or it might look like that. And display none means don't show them, period. All right? So those are the 4. But the one you need to be most concerned with for the test tomorrow is the display none. All right? So again, this says that if the ID that we have is mobile, whatever it is that we're going to set up, we're not going to display it. and it'll probably be our images that we won't display. On the other hand, if our display is desktop, display it inline. And I just went over with you what that meant. All right? All right, so save the file, use the validator to help you find syntax errors. One thing I have to do a better job of is from now on, I found this out in the last test. I'm going to send Evan an email on this. I haven't done it yet. But I'm going to recommend that somehow he redo the points. And I would make at least 10 points that for that test. You should have had to have validated your CSS, and you should have had to validate every one of your HTML files. Because I can tell you the way that those, those of you who I mentioned that forgot to put in body tags, etc., that would have blown up right away. All right? You have to get used to writing valid CSS. I will tell you that what you get out of this program, amongst other things, is you will be creating an electronic portfolio. So if somebody says, Valerie, we'd like to hire you. Do you have an example of some of your work? She can show them. There will be people there, if they're going to hire her for a web developer position, that will go through her pages. And I'm not saying every one, but at least some of them, they'll validate them. They want to know, does she write good code? All right? And many of you got away with that in the last test, but you won't in future tests. All right. So, number 6 says again, open yoga.css, edit the style rules as follows. All right. It's kind of an unwritten rule that when you create media queries, which is what we're going to do right now, starting on the bottom of 367, you put them on the bottom. It's just, that's the way that it's done. In fact, a lot of times you'll even see this, and I mentioned this the other day, where they'll put in here media queries. And they'll put it in there as a comment, then they'll start putting in the media queries. All right? So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so go ahead and put that in, and we'll take a look at all the other stuff that's there on the next step in just a second. So what we're saying here is what we're about to put in here. This is going to handle anything that's screen only. And remember, we looked at this in the last chapter we just went over yesterday. If it's not screen, it's typically going to be print. So we're talking about non-print stuff. If the only rule that we put in, if the only media query we put in was this one, it would say handle everything that's screen only and is between 0 pixels and 1024 pixels. Does that make sense? Not only is there a max width, if you want to use it, there's a min width. We're going to look at that in a little bit. All right? So if you turn to page 368, now what we're doing is we're adding more CSS. So I'm going to go through these steps that are in here, A to K. All right, so I'm at the top. It says configure a body element selector. Well, you know how to do this. It's got to have a margin and a padding set to 0. That should make sense to everyone. Remember, when you set margin or you set padding, or both as in this case, if you want there to be none, you don't have to say 0px or 0% or 0m. 0 means none. So you don't have to put a type in there, okay? All right, the next step says configure a wrapper ID. It was kind of neat that Charles was in here this morning as I was having problems with the computer, because he was watching me and I was typing. I could actually type pretty fast. But what I didn't realize, he said that he might have to look at this at the machine because the touch thing that's on here is really sensitive, and I guess there's settings for it. And I didn't realize it, but my palm is constantly hitting it. That's why if you see my screen size changing, if it gets bigger or small, that's usually what it is. I'm doing it. Not on purpose, but I'm doing it. All right, so configure a wrapper ID. Set the width to 100%. Set the minimum width to 0. Again, we don't have to give it a type because it's 0. Set the margin to 0 and set the padding to 0. So I can just grab these two that we just did and copy them in down here. All right. The next step says configure the header element selector. So header, and set the top padding to 1 pixel. All right, hopefully everybody's got this body stuff so I can start lifting that up a little. All right, so that's A and B and C. All right, when we get done with this, this is going to handle everything for our regular screen size. When we get to task 7 that you see on the bottom of page, or the bottom half of page 368, that'll handle the mobile stuff. So this is still going to look a little funky, even after we go through steps A through K. It's still going to look a little funky until we do task 7. Then hopefully it'll look the way that it's supposed to look, provided I didn't make any mistakes. So part D says now we want a nav. It says the mobile layout uses a single column. Set float to none, width to auto, and padding left to 2 M's. Now, one thing that you have to be, you have to start getting a familiarity with, comfort zone, whatever you want to call it. This says for any nav tag I have. This says for any anchor tag that I have, but that anchor tag must be inside of a nav. So if we've got anchor tags that aren't in our navigation, they're not going to be affected by this. And that should make sense to all of you. And also notice in these two examples that are here, we're working with relative size measurements. We're working with percentages or we're working with M's. So remember, absolute sizing is with pixels and points. Relative sizing is with percentages and M's. That's what we're using in here now. All right? All right, so step F says that we want to come in and we want to do a main. I lift this up, put that up a little bit. It says the top and the bottom padding, we want to set to 2 EMs. Left and right padding to 1 M. Oh, okay, well, why don't we just, remember, we can do this. Okay, and that's fine. Remember what our shortcut for this is? There's two other ways at least that we can do this. So I'm going to put them all in here, but I'm going to end up removing them, but I just want to show you these. So we can do it like that, that's fine, or we can just do it in one line, padding, where we say 2 M's, okay? So top, then right, which would be 1 M, then bottom, which is again 2 M's, and left, which is 1 M. So that's another way. So this right here could be totally redone as this. That's one way. The other way that we could totally redo that would be to just say padding, and remember, if I say 2 M, that's top and bottom, and if I say 1 M, that's left and right. All right, and that's really, it's a good example she put in here because it does show you the 3 different ways that this can be done. Now, some developers like to put this in because they're specifying, and if somebody wants to change it later, just change one of them, they have to go in and actually kind of know what they're doing, for lack of better words. Other people like this one, and they say they can make the same argument. And some people say, I like this one because it's the least amount of typing. All right, so it really doesn't matter which one you use, but regardless, if you're a web developer, you could see any or all of these. All right, so you have to understand what each of them means. Because I'm a little stretched for space, I'm just going to use that one. All right. So we've got the top and bottom, left and right padding. We want the margin to 0. Font size of 90%. Oops. Don't know why I keep hitting that, but I do. And we want to clear all floats. Does everything that's up there under the main make sense to people? Because this is your chance to ask if something does not make sense. And if you see that I missed anything, because I'm sure not trying to, but let me know, please. All right, so that's the main stuff. G says to configure the pound hero. So we've got that ID that's called hero. It says code a style declaration to set the width to 100%. Boy, oh boy, now that he's told me that, now I keep hitting that. And the height to auto. So this says make it as wide as possible. And I believe that this is for an image. So that's saying take up as much of the screen as you can and let the height be set proportionally to the width. So when it says auto, that's what it means, is set the height proportional to the way the width is. All right. H says that we want to set for H2, H3, P, and DL elements. The left and the right padding, we want to set to 2M. Now, what I'm going to show you is not, depending on your point of view, either a very important thing or not a very important thing. Because step I in here says configure the main UL selector, set the margin to 2M. I could put it right here. There's absolutely no problem with doing it. I think that if you really, are thinking about this, that what you'll do is if there's a main and you're going to do something with main UL, you'll put it right underneath it. It doesn't make it work any better, but when you're looking for stuff, it makes it much easier to find when you put like things together. All right? So your main UL, we want the left margin set to 2Ms. And that's it for that main UL. We want to set in step J a float left class. Okay, so I'll put that down here. And since it's a class, it starts with a period. Float left. And you'll notice that it says it's got left margin of 2Ms. And a bottom margin of 1M. And then finally, it says configure the clear class. And I don't think we've got a class in here called clear, but and we want it to have padding left of 2Ms. All right. Now, two quick things before and then we're done with this part of it here, and then we'll go to the last task. But two things to realize. I've seen people do this before. They'll say, well, look, we've got a margin left and we've got a margin bottom, right? So what if I want to put it all in one line, and I just want to basically say this. So remember, the first one's the top, so I say margin. Well, I don't want any on top, so I make it 0. And then the next one is right, and I don't want any of that, and I make it 0. Then the next one is bottom, so I make it 1M. Then the next one is left, so I make it 2M. And that will work. All right? The problem is, later, somebody may decide they want to set one of those someplace else, and it might end up getting overridden. What I'm trying to tell you is when you got a lot of zeros in here, most of the time, developers do it like this, where they separate it out. All right? There's no law on this, and I've said this before, no joke, but there are no CSS police. There's no one that if you do it one way or the other, the only way that somebody will come back is if somehow it's wrong, and then someone who finds that out might come back to you and say, why'd you do it like that? So that's it. Now please look up on the screen here, because this is the most important part of this. You better make sure we started with this media only thing and that curly brace right there. You see them in lines 70 and 71. Everything that we just did should be inside of there. If it's not going to work correctly. All right. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to go out. In fact, I'm going to grab all of it. So I'm going to copy all of it to the clipboard. And then I'm going to go out. Hopefully the internet is a little more stable than it was. And I'm going out to the CSS validator. I'm going to click direct input, and I'm going to paste this in. And click check. Green is good. So you can tell that everything that I put in thus far meets validation. That's good. All right. If you do yours and it's not green, chances are you mistyped something or whatever. And these are the kind of things that the validator will find. In a way I look at it, is it stuff that's kind of lurking where it could eventually go wrong. But it's at least telling me that syntactically everything that I just put in, I put in correctly. All right? All right, I'm jumping back to the CSS file now, and right under where I just put that first media query, so right under where I just put it, I'm going to add the second one. All right? So right after that last curly brace there, I'm going to add my second media query, and I'm on task 7 on the bottom half of page 368. Now, what some people find, I'm going to show you this, and you might think, well, that's a good idea, or that really stinks. Either way, all right? But what some people do is they'll come in here and they'll copy this whole line. You're going to see this a lot from me next semester when we get more programming, and even later when we get into the JavaScript class. And they'll come in here and they'll put in a comment. And that comment will say something like, begin this. And I'm just going to copy this whole thing down here. Whoops. And end. Now, you don't have to do that. It doesn't make your program run any better. But I remember telling students years ago this story, and it's true. I came in one morning, and I was at 7 o'clock. I walked into the lab, and there was a student in there. And he was never early, which surprised me. But the room was about this big, but it was not as well laid out as this one is. And literally, he had 12 pieces of paper that were along the floor. And you could see there were lines all, and I said, what's the problem? He said, well, I've been going through this, and I got 71 left curly braces, and I've got 70 right curly, and I can't figure out where I'm missing the one. And I told him about this, and once he started doing that, he didn't have problems, because now you can pair them up together. You don't have to do that. But you might find that when you do that, it makes it a little easier to see things. Now, what if I don't want to write all that stuff? Well, what if I said here, this is the second media query, right? So begin media query 2. End media query 2. If that's easier. If you decide you don't want to put any of it in, then don't. Whatever is easiest for you. I'm just giving you some suggestions, which you may or may not choose to implement. Now, this one says media only all. That means anything. Print, anything. But this means I want a max width of 768 pixels. 768 is usually that's the size, all right, for a tablet. 768 pixels. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to start to configure this stuff. All right. So again, I'm going to go through steps A through G that are on the bottom of page 368. So you notice the font size is 2M, which means almost double the font size from what it would normally be. We're putting some top padding in there. We're putting some left padding in there. And we're saying that the width is supposed to be 85%. Plus we're telling it here to align this. So we'll center align our text. All right. Next, we want the anchor tags in the nav section. So nav A. Again, I'm moving this up, but you have it in your book on the bottom part of page 368. So we've done parts A, B, C, D, and E. Now I've got to do F and G. We should be done. Again, I'm going to go back and revalidate and remove everything that's in there, put back in everything, and again, it's still green. All right. So now that we've done all that, I'm going to go back to my index page. Everything should be saved now, and I'm going to run it, and now I'm going to see if it is responsive. Do you notice how the picture's going away if you look up on the screen here? All right. So in a nutshell, that's responsive web design. Again, I gave you the finished product for this one, so if something didn't work, feel free to ask. But if it didn't work, you can check it with that one. All right? And the only thing that changes in Chapter 8 for the hands-on practice, it's just 4 steps, is they take this right here that you see on the screen that I'm putting the mouse around, they take this and they turn it into a table. I'm not going to go through that with you, because I want you to have time to work on this stuff. All right? All right. Let's take a break. It's 9 o'clock. Let's come back at 9:10, and I'm going to talk again, but just for about 10 minutes. I want to show you something that hopefully will help you with the assignment. All right, then I'm going to let you loose. All right, just a couple more things. First, I just emailed to everybody. Unfortunately, I didn't change the tagline, so it still says Path of Light Studio. But the Bootstrap tutorial, the one I mentioned to you. All right, so you all have that now, and it's a PDF file. And I wanted to take 5 or 10 minutes and go over a couple things that are in there with you. I'm not going to read anything to you. This is the way that it's set up. I'm not going to read any of it, but that's the way it's set up. So it explains to you when you go out to getbootstrap.com what's on that Getting Started page. It explains the different CSS in there. It goes over the Bootstrap components, and it goes over JavaScript. Now, I may or may not have mentioned this to you before, so what it does is it goes out to getbootstrap.com, and it tries to explain the entire site to you. All right, it tries to go through the entire site with you, just so you know what the whole thing is about. Okay. All right, so that's the first part of it. Oh, I should mention, again, for the Path of Light, that's the way we ended the schedule in Chapter 7. If you go and add this code for Chapter 8, you take this right here, that schedule, and you convert it to this. That's all that it is. So I'm not going through that with you, but I just wanted you to be able to see that. So what they mention to you is the download. They explain the differences between the ways that you can download things much better than I could. And they explain these are the files that you get right here when you download Bootstrap on your own. These are what you get. You get what's called a dist, which is a distributed directory. And inside of there is Bootstrap that's got CSS, it's got JS, and it's got fonts. The suggestion is leave all that there and don't touch it. That's got all those glyph icons, so it's got those little icons that you're able to use in your site. All right. The suggestion is that you remove this one and only use the minified version. Does everybody understand the difference between these? If I go and open up bootstrap.js, it's going to look a nice looking file. It'll have comments in it and everything else, a lot of white space. If I open up bootstrap.min.js, it's the same file, but they ran what's called a minifier tool on it that removes virtually almost all of the white space that's in there. So instead of it being maybe 400 or 500 lines, it looks like it's about 2 or 3 lines long, but those lines stretch out and stretch out and stretch out. All right. Then in here, until you get really well versed in this, it's recommended that you remove all the theme stuff. All right. You don't need this map file. You don't need this file, or this file, or this file. So the only one that you should keep is bootstrap.min.cs, bootstrap.min.js, and all of your font files. So why am I showing you this? Because if you decide that you're going to build your own site, you're going to build it with Bootstrap, this is what we're going to look at tomorrow. All right. Then what I'm telling you is that you can go out here, you can click Download Bootstrap right there. So I'm on getbootstrap.com and I'm clicking Download Bootstrap. All right. And it says, how do you want to download it? Until you really, have some experience in it, the recommendation is you choose the first one, which just says Download Bootstrap. So I'm going to download it. It's going to throw it into my downloads folder. All right. It says, yeah, do you want to do this? Yes. So I'm going to save it, run the scan. All right. It says it's done downloading. So it should be, at least, in my downloads folder. And there it is. So I'm going to right mouse click and just drag it out here. So I'm going to move it there. And I'm going to just throw it into a new folder that's called Jeff's BS. That sounds fitting. All right, I'm going to drag that in here, and I'm going to tell it to extract right there. Okay, so now I've got this Bootstrap 3.3.7, which is the current version, and it's the distributed version. So I double click on that, and there's my 3 folders. All right, see if I can make that a little bigger, and it's not letting me make it any bigger. All right. So the CSS file, what I'm telling you is I don't need anything in here except for bootstrap.min.css. So every other file that's in here, I'm getting rid of. So now all I've got in there is bootstrap.min.css. Everything else is gone. All right. So then I go up to the fonts folder. I can keep all those. Then I go to the JS folder and I remove everything except bootstrap.min.js. All right. So now I'm almost ready to go. All right. There's a couple more things I have to do. First of all, did anybody notice what kind of file don't we have here? What? There's no HTML file. All right. So what we can do is we can go back to getbootstrap.com and click the Getting Started, and we can grab any one of these. So there's a basic template. That's a basic Bootstrap template. I can grab that. All that literally is going to put on there is a paragraph tag that says Hello World. That's it. So I'm going to just grab all this. So I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. And I'm going to come back out here where we just were. And I'm going to come in here and say New Text Document. And I'm going to call it index.html. All right. And I'm going to open it. And I'm going to copy all that in. Okay? Now, a couple things. First of all, it says CSS, Bootstrap Min CSS. That's good. That's where I put it, right? But if for some reason you decide you don't want the minified one, you want the other one that's just called bootstrap.css, then you've got to remove the .min. That's up to you. All right? Then, same thing with my JavaScript. So that's there. So I've got all that stuff in there right now. It's all there. So I can do a run, and I can run it in Chrome. It's not going to look like much. It should say hello world. It just have a tag on it. Well, it should, but I don't know why it's not there. I should be seeing this. That's all that's in there. But it shows you the natural way that you would set a file up in Bootstrap. All right? So I can come back and I can copy in from here any of these. I could use this one, etc. A couple of you have asked me outside of class. You can go out there. There are literally thousands of free Bootstrap templates out there. Literally. All right, so if you want to get started that way, you can. Now, jumping back into what we were just looking at before with the tutorial. That explains everything that's in these files. It talks about all this. The stuff that's in here, if you wanted to try to install it the other way, all right, you have to use something that's called Grunt. I'm not going to go into it with you, but that's explained in there. This is what I wanted to show you. It's kind of important. Remember before when we were talking about sizes? This explains the size setup. So less than 768 says basically you're using a cell phone. All right, up to 768, usually between about 768 and 992, you're using a tablet. Greater than that, you're using a desktop. That's all explained. Much better than I just gave you the micro-encapsulated version, but that's explained in here. They've got charts, and they explain how you can set this up. All right? One thing, you don't have to say this out loud, but you have to commit this to memory. To use Bootstrap really well and use it effectively, you include in Bootstrap what's called a grid system. And this shows how you set the grid up. The thing about the grid system that you have to remember is everything has to equal 12. That's it. So if I want to separate this out, I can make 12 of these on the same line. Or I can make one that's 4, one that's 3, and one that's 3, etc. I can do that. I can make 4, 4, 4. I guess that's 6, 3, 3 here. I can make 4, 8. I can make 12 and none, etc. But it's got to equal 12. Every row that you put in there is separated out. You don't see it, but it's separated out into 12ths. Okay? So every time I create these things, that's the way it's got to be. The other thing you might notice, these all say col, which means column, the column length. These say MD. MD means medium. There's MD for medium. There's SM for small. There's LG for large. And it's for the size that you're going to be using. All right, the size medium. I mean, are you going to be doing it on a cell phone, or are you going to be doing it on a 24-inch monitor? That's all explained in here. They show you how to set these up. All right? They show you how you would typically set something up for a normal desktop, how you would typically set it up for a smaller screen size. All right? So there's a lot of that stuff in there, and they go through it. Then they say you can even have offsets. So if I wanted to use a third of the screen, then a blank, and then a third of the screen, they show you how to do that. All right? That's what this whole thing in here is about. Then they start breaking it down, and they say, okay, now you want to start building things. Well, they even take like a table like we did, just a simple table, and they show you how you can set the table up for Bootstrap. It's not really, there's not very much you have to add. Bootstrap is, for lack of better words, it's kind of like, imagine that what Bootstrap is it's thousands of classes on steroids. That's pretty much what it is. All right? And you can set it up with striping, you can put borders on, you can set it up so when you hover over something, anything you want, and you can combine more than one of these. Then they go into forms and how you can set up different kinds of forms. Some people, this is one of the reasons they like Bootstrap, because now you've got control over the color of your buttons. If you never want to color them, if you want them to be gray like they are by default, you can do that by just using the default. But there's primary, all right, there's secondary, and there's like warning buttons, and there's all sorts of different colors that you can set up. Then they go into images. And again, it may not sound like a big thing. You can set images up so that you can take any image and you can give it a rounded background, a circular background, or a square background, and do whatever you want to do with them. That's all explained in here. They talk some about printing in here, so that's in there. Then they go into more depth about buttons. All right. Pagination. They talk about the Jumbotron. If you've never seen the Jumbotron before, everybody see this thing right here where I'm putting the mouse here, right there? That's a Jumbotron. By default, a Jumbotron, okay, I've got my choice. If I put my Jumbotron inside of what's called a container, I get the little margin here. If I don't want there to be any kind of spacing in there, then instead of putting the Jumbotron inside of the container, I put the container inside of the Jumbotron. Then it stretches all the way out. All right? So I could grab any one of these. So for instance, if I thought, well, this one's really cool, I can click on this where it says Bootstrap theme. Boom, I can click on there. That's what it's going to look like. All right, now I right mouse click on it. I choose View Page Source, Control A, Control C to copy it. All right, I go back. This is the one I put in before. I'm going to remove it and replace it with that one. All right, I'm going to save it, do a run in Chrome. All right, and you look at it, you go, well, that doesn't look good. That doesn't look like it. Well, what that means is that someplace in here, they're referencing a CSS file that I don't have. All right, I can tell you that's what it is. So I'd have to look through this, but somewhere in here, there's another CSS file. Notice that these are all under dist. All right, what if I remove all these so it just looks like this? I don't need this one. Remember, that's one of the ones I removed was that theme stuff. All right, I don't have an assets folder, so I can remove that. I don't have my own theme.css. I might want to add that later. So I removed all that stuff that I really and truly don't need. And the big thing is I made that path correct. All right, still isn't there. So that theme.css file, I'd have to go back to here and find where they have that theme.css file that's over here someplace there. And sometimes when you click on these, come on. If I go over here and I find theme.css, there it is. So that's what it is. So I can click on that. Again, it's probably still not going to be perfect. Put in a new file, paste that in, save that into my CSS. I think it was just theme.css. All right, you can see how that took place. Now, it looked like this. Oh, there still must be another one out there. Oh, I didn't say that it was in a folder? All right. Well, that would be here. You're right. Thank you. All right. Now, how long did that take? Even with the screw-ups, and thank you for the help. All right. But that didn't take any time at all. So you can go out when you're doing your own assignments, you can do this for the test. You can go out to free Bootstrap themes. I don't want you to be spending, if you're taking a 4-hour test, I don't want you to be spending 3 hours picking out a theme. There's a word for that. The word is stupid. All right? I don't want you to do things that are stupid. You're all smart people. So I want you to do things the right way. And again, I applaud Eric. He did that on his last test. He even put a comment in there. I went out and got this theme. It didn't say on your test you couldn't do that. And he got a working page, and I think at least you copied it to your other pages. Boom, that saved him a heck of a lot of time. All right, and it gave him time to concentrate on the other stuff that maybe he struggled more with or would take more time naturally. So when you're doing this, and again, Tiffany, I'll give you the homework. I've got a copy, and I'll give it to you in just a minute. But when you're doing your homework then, all right, this is that first thing on responsive. There's not much code in there. All right, this is an actual article that you're supposed to go through and put in the code. This is the thing on Flexbox that's on CSS Tricks. And these two says build the responsive website from the following tutorial. All right, and there's one and there's one. I will tell you one thing about Derek Banis. Typically with his sites, he gives you the code. You might have to look for it, but he gives you the code. But the idea is if all you do in this, let's say that you say, you know, wow, I went out and I Googled all this stuff and I found all this code, 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 and I found all that code. Well, I know I'm going to get 100% on my homework because I copied all the code in. That's not going to help you much when you take the test, the hands-on next week. All right? Because there is going to be stuff in there that you're going to have to manually do. All right? Questions on anything we've gone over? So tomorrow, what we'll do when you come in here, first thing is you're going to take the hands-on. I think that's probably the best way to do it. We'll do the hands-on tomorrow, get that out of the way. All right? Then I'm going to give you an entire Bootstrap project, which is a thing that I did online. All right? I'm going to give you all of it, but I'm going to spend about an hour explaining because it's in like 4 or 5 stages, so you can see what happens at each stage. All right? And it's not going to totally make sense. One of the reasons I tape these, and I don't know if any of you are going back and watching these or not, but if you are, it's so that if you're like, well, I think he said that in class and I don't remember it, well, then you can go back and do that. All right? Questions on anything we just went over or anything we've gone over today? All right. I think other than Tiffany, everyone has the assignment, correct? So you now have 2 hours. And at 11:30, we're going to spend 20 minutes going over that test review.